O2E with Nick E, where we help take your experiences from ordinary to extraordinary. Lifetime Nation, I am so pumped up about our guest today, an old friend. Give it up for Jason Maupin. Jason, what's up, brother? Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, man. I greatly appreciate it. The honor's all
Yeah,
mine.
yeah, man. So we met, I was trying to do the math in my head, probably about 17 years ago. So
Yep.
you are the CEO and founder of Elevate Industries. You started the company 19 years ago. And where we met, we were at this big, huge camp for middle schoolers and high schoolers. I was one of the camp chaperones, and you were the keynote speaker. And I think at that same time, your wife was rocking out in this band, and it was one of the coolest experiences I had ever had in my life. And just as a speaker, you were phenomenal. So what I decided to do is basically stalk you over the interwebs over the next couple of years and keep the relationship going, man. So thank you so much for all that you've done for me personally. And I was like, you know what? I need to get Jason on the show so we can hear all the amazingness that you do.
Well, I appreciate that, man. It's very kind of you. It's great to be here, and I'm looking forward to it.
Cool. So let's just kind of tell the audience who you are. So talk about Elevate Industries. What is it? What do you do?
Absolutely. So back in 2003, I started Elevate Industries. Elevate Industries, the whole mission behind Elevate is to reach out to the hopeless and the hurting and bring those that are drowning in darkness into the light. So that's our mission statement. That's our thesis statement, if you will. Basically, I speak in high schools, middle schools, prisons, all over the world, camps, as you said, and bring a message of hope and positive mental health. So I speak about mental health and my story, how I came from a past of suicide, brokenness, abuse, and how I went from, basically brokenness to beauty. So, yeah.
Yeah, and actually, as we're talking, that's probably one of the reasons I connected with you. So I think about a year or two after I heard you speak, my brother took his life, and by the time we air this podcast, it'll be the 15-year anniversary will be the next day.
Wow.
So I remember kind of trying to figure out life and trying to figure out everything after he killed himself, and I was like, man, I remember your message and your talk. So just kind of, if you don't mind, share your story because it is so powerful.
Absolutely, man. I grew up in a very tumultuous upbringing with my father. His father before him was abusive, and it was just this generational curse in my family. My dad wasn't an alcoholic, he wasn't a drug addict, he just was not a very nice guy. And so we had a lot of abuse growing up, a lot of mental, physical, verbal abuse. And due to that abuse, when I was 9 years old, I became suicidal. I was trying to take my life a couple times as a kid. Thankfully, that wasn't successful with that. My brother, he, due to that pain that he dealt with, everybody has baggage, everybody has trauma in their life somewhere, and we have the ability to either get better or bitter. And my brother, really got bitter and started using drugs at that point. Went from marijuana to ecstasy to cocaine, till finally he was a methamphetamine addict. Failed out of the university. The money he was supposed to spend on his books, he spent on meth. And basically, we left my dad in 24 hours, packed up our house, and moved to Oklahoma from Arizona, and just trying to start over again. And we were afraid for our lives, didn't really know what was going to happen. Just tried to start over and kind of get as far as we could away where our family still was, but where our dad wouldn't know where we were.
Wow.
So we were homeless for about 6 months, and in that time frame, hopped around from motel to motel, and here I am, 13 years old, trying to figure out life and trying to figure out going to this new school, and
Yeah.
everybody. Halfway through my seventh grade years when we moved, so there was just a lot of baggage that I was carrying around. I used to have a stuttering problem. I used to look at the ground when I walked. Had no self-esteem due to the abuse. Um, and yeah, so I found myself at one point at the top of a four-story parking garage in a business park where we were staying in one of these motels, and went up to the top of this four-story parking garage and was just like, I'm done with life. But thankfully, my faith at that point intervened, and I got off that ledge and started a relationship with Christ, and was able to become the person I am today through a lot of counseling, a lot of work. It wasn't overnight. It wasn't like this, bed of roses after I had
Yeah.
that encounter. But um, I, I, I should say that God put these people in my life, mentors in my life that helped direct me to a healthier future. And that's
Mhm.
one big thing that we all have to remember. We can't change our past. We can't fix what happened back here, but we can change our future. We can fix tomorrow. So we can wallow in it. We can get bitter, but if we get bitter, that bitterness just turns in that unforgiveness, I should say, turns into bitterness, and then that bitterness ends up turning to malicious acts, and we act out against those that had nothing to do with our pain to begin with. So but yeah, man, I was, you know, up to 14 actually when I had that, encounter, and I ended up being with a guy that really mentored me, took me under his wing, and showed me what it was to be a man, showed me what it was to take responsibility for myself, and and then not be a victim. Like make sure that I make something of myself because like I said, you can't change your past, but you can change your future.
Yeah, I mean, even listening to you right now, I'm like getting goosebumps and chills. And I've heard this story before, but I think it probably resonates on so many levels because the world is a little crazy right now, and I don't know if
Just,
anything is
just a
getting
little bit.
just a little bit, right? Like, I don't know if it's getting better at all. And there's so many people going through so many different things, and the more and more I talk to people, the more and more I feel like mental health is coming up. And I think the beautiful part about it is it used to be a stigma, right? Like back, like and it still probably is a little bit, but I feel like you used to not be able to talk about it. You used to not be able to share it. Oh man, they got stuff going on. But now I feel like it's embraced more. But what have you seen in your role right now? Is it like, are we talking about it more? Is there more things to help people?
There definitely is. I mean, from when you and I were kids, it wasn't really acceptable to say, "Hey, I'm going to a counselor or visiting a counselor." People would automatically label you as loony
Yeah.
and write you off. Sadly, but they would write you
Hmm.
off. So I feel that's more acceptable now that people are seeing counselors, mental health counselors, psychiatrists, psychologists,
Yeah.
trauma. People that are dealing with trauma and sorting out their past, because we can bury that stuff all we want, but I equate it to a soda can, a carbonation where you take a can, you shake that soda can up. If you open it after you shake it, what's going to happen? It's going to explode everywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's what's happening with our America right now. That's what's happening with our world right now. So there's been so much, even the past couple of years with COVID and racial tensions and political unrest. You name the unrest, we've had it in our country,
Yeah.
right? So there's so much trauma that we've even gone through as a nation the past couple of years that people are trying to sort through.
Yeah.
You add the trauma on top of what people have experienced as a kid, and you have a perfect storm where people are just not knowing how to process the grief that they're experiencing with losing their job, the grief that they're experiencing by losing a family member, some of these things that they're wanting to process, but they don't know how. So reaching out
Yeah.
to that counselor, the psychotherapist. I even hate that name, psychotherapist, because automatically
It
people are
sounds
like,
like, oh, like, oh, psychotherapist.
yeah, what is this? They put you in a straitjacket? No, no. But
Yeah. Yeah.
psychotherapy is just really just helping you process that trauma, and I really had to do that with my life because, like I said, I've been doing this for 19 years. Well, about
Mhm.
13 years into my professional speaking career, I had always had really vivid nightmares where um, I was from my past, and I would wake up screaming, or it's just crazy. I feel so bad for my wife. We've been married, we've been married 18 years now, and I'll tell you what, man, she's just such a trooper. But I finally just said I got to do something. And like I said, this is 13 years into me speaking, and I'm
Wow.
like, I need to talk to somebody to figure this stuff out. So I went in and I met with a psychotherapist, and I spoke for about 15 minutes, or actually about 45 minutes, and he said, "Hey, do you care if I speak for about 15 minutes?" And I said, "Sure." He said, "Well, you have severe PTSD." And I was like, wait a second, no, I I
I
didn't
haven't been
see
in the war. I'm good. Yeah.
I didn't see my buddy,
That's my
die.
brain.
Yeah, yeah, I didn't see my buddy die in a foxhole here, man.
Yeah.
I've and that's my defense mechanism. I've always dealt with trauma through humor, and there's good things about that. And but yeah, man, I was just kind of laughing off like, no way, man. And then he started telling me the symptoms of post traumatic stress, and I just started going, oh my gosh, like this is why I do the things I do.
Yeah.
The hyper vigilance that I am. Checking the doors to see if they're locked like 3 times a night. It's like
Yeah.
different things because I had this. I was brought up in this home where I was not safe. I didn't feel safe, and so I had to do certain things to make myself feel safe. So
Mhm.
um, yeah, man. So I started doing what's called cognitive therapy. And Dr. David Burns wrote the book on cognitive therapy. This guy's absolutely brilliant, and he has a book called Feeling Good. And this book is a lifesaver because he talks about the top 10 most cognitive distortions. Cognitive distortions is a fancy word for lies we tell ourselves. Okay, so
I'm
you
glad
can,
you clarified that. I was like, hold on, let me Google
yeah,
that real
yeah,
quick.
right,
So I act
exactly.
like I know what he's talking about.
Yeah, exactly what you're saying.
Oh yeah, cognitive distortion. Yeah.
Yeah, so cognitive distortions are just fancy term for lies we tell ourselves. And there's, believe it or not, if you Google top cognitive distortions, you'll see a good 10 that come up: black and white thinking, mind reading, where you try to get ahead of a crisis that's coming. So you or a meeting that's coming. So you put yourself in that
Yeah.
person's shoes and you start role playing. And believe it or not, cognitive distortions can lead to severe depression if not dealt with. So cognitive therapy helps you recognize the distortions you're telling yourself. Then it helps you mitigate that. And once you recognize the distortion, you can go, oh, that's what I'm doing right now. I need to stop that instead of going down this bunny trail. So
Yeah.
absolutely revolutionized my life and helped with the past trauma and things that the distortions I was telling myself. So absolutely great. But yeah, people are reaching out for help more. I feel like, sadly, because it's gotten to a point where they they're tired. It's nothing else has worked, right? So
Yeah.
it's like they're going, I really need to stop blaming others for my issues and accept responsibility for myself and deal with the person that's looking back at me in the mirror.
Hmm.
And that it's only when we do that that we can really start seeing the change in ourselves and becoming that person that we're meant to be and living our best life.
Yeah.
If we stay in that perpetual spiral of victimhood, and it's because I would have, I could have blamed my father through all my life, saying, and there were
Still
times
even
that I
now, probably, right?
even now, like,
Yeah.
because I was abused as a child, I'm this way. And but that doesn't get me anywhere. It just makes me more bitter. It makes me have that unforgiveness, and that perpetuates this victim mentality, of which then I start lashing out against people and that had nothing to do with my pain to begin with. And that's not fair to my kids.
Yeah.
I decided I wanted to break that cycle. I
Hmm.
have 3 beautiful kids, beautiful wife, and of 18 years, like I said. And I've been able to break that cycle of abuse. Never had to raise a hand to my kids in anger or verbally abusing. I said no, no more. But it took me saying I'm not going to be a victim. I'm not going to blame. It took me taking responsibility and saying I can't change that, but I can change what tomorrow brings. So yeah.
Yeah. Wow. So much good stuff there. When I was kind of reaching out to you, we were talking about you being on the podcast. I kind of titled this episode "Self Care, Motivate, and Elevate." And so, if there's someone out there, anyone who's listening, and well, I'll take a step back. You do have a mental health podcast, which we will include on the link below as well too, so that people, if they want more information, if they want to follow, if you want to hear more of this just amazingness, that they can follow along. But so, what's your message of hope? I know that you have a message of hope. I know you speak at high schools all across the world. Um, and I know you speak for a long amount of time, but if you could give us a quick like snapshot of your message of hope, if there's anyone out there hurting, anyone out there struggling, what would that be?
My biggest thing is I would say don't be afraid to be vulnerable. A lot of people label vulnerability as weakness, but
Hmm.
vulnerability is strength. It doesn't come natural for me to be getting up in front of thousands of people each year and saying, I grew up in a home where my father was abusive, I was suicidal, my brother's a methamphetamine addict, my mom had lupus growing up. It sounds like a country song. I'm like, this is crazy. So
Yeah.
I use humor to break it up, the seriousness of it, but the vulnerability, even though it doesn't come natural for me, I realize that my vulnerability, it breeds vulnerability. So when we're vulnerable, we end up causing other people to say, you know what, I can what I say, take off your mask for the last, not your COVID mask. I'm talking about, I've been for the last, like I said, 19 years speaking about a mask, and then here comes COVID, and people are really wearing a mask, and so on my website it
Everyone's
says
trying to
take
take your message.
yeah,
Everyone's
I know,
trying to.
right?
Thanks a lot, COVID. You're not only messing stuff up. Now you're messing up their whole
Yeah,
message.
exactly. And everybody wears a mask. Everybody, that mask, it covers up our insecurities, it covers up failures, it covers up our fears, and it keeps people at a safe distance. But it's okay to take off that mask. I've had students come up to me and their mask has represented addiction, or students come up to me and their mask has represented the sports that they play and the uniform they hide behind because the popularity or whatever. I had students come up to me about, with cut self-harm issues, and everybody has some type of pain or mask they're hiding behind because they don't want people to see the real them. But what happens is when you take off that mask and choose vulnerability, people actually, believe it or not, they applaud it. And they say, wow, man, this person is brave enough to share their
Yeah.
biggest weaknesses with me. I want to do the same thing. And then and I tell them, listen, if I can make it, you can make it, no matter how bad things get.
Yeah.
Trust me, man. I could go through story after my first memory of my father. Even growing up as a kid, I was 3 years old. He sat my brother and I across the kitchen table, and he had a high-powered handgun in one hand, and he said, if you ever disobey me, I will kill you. And so that's just one small
At 3 years
story.
old, that's your first memory.
That was my first memory of my father at 3 years old. And so that fear, man, just grips you. That anxiety grips you. And there's someone listening to this podcast right now. You're gripped with anxiety. You're gripped with fear. You're gripped with that trauma. But I promise you, it's going to get better if you start taking responsibility for yourself and you start reaching out for help. With a counselor, maybe some self-help books. Get around people that love you, care for you. Don't surround yourself with toxic people. Cut those people out of your life, because you cannot. There's a difference between forgiveness and reconciliation. Everybody wants to say we got to forgive. It would be foolish of me. I've had students come up to me and talk about how they've been sexually abused. It would be absolutely foolish of me to say go reconcile with your offender, because
Yeah.
what if their offender is not sorry and they offend them again, right? So
Yeah.
it takes one person to forgive. I can forgive, but then it takes two people to reconcile. So
Yeah.
I can forgive, but if I might not be able to reconcile because this person might not think that they're wrong. So
Hmm.
you can still forgive and not hold on to that bitterness, not hold on to that hurt. There's a story I heard one time. This young lady was raped and abused, and her attackers left her for dead. She got enough gumption to go out and by the highway try to flag someone down. Ended up flagging down her attackers, of which they dragged her back out in the woods, offended her again. So she's in the hospital. She's recovering. She's people just they send up psychologists, people helping with her
Yeah.
mental health. They just think she's just going to be absolutely jacked up. And she says, I'm going to have to do counseling through this, but I am going to be okay. I have forgiven my offenders. And they said, how in the world can you forgive someone that has offended you and hurt you this bad? And she said, I allowed them to take 2 hours of my life. I will not allow them to take the rest
Mm.
of my life. And I'm like, man,
That's
like
powerful.
it is, because when people hurt us, when they betray us to our core, we want to put up those walls, and we block. The crazy thing about those walls and that mask is it doesn't just block out the bad, it blocks out the good and the love that we can receive from others as well. We
Yeah,
can't.
because I feel like we're holding on to that, right? We're letting it take up space in our head, and we're always thinking about it, which That mean I only have so much room in my brain anyway, so if I have all that in there, then I'm not going to be able to receive anything else if I have that bitterness, right?
And I did that for years, man. Even with my own wife, I would keep things at a distance, and I had trouble with intimacy at times, with being vulnerable, even with my own spouse. And I'm going, man, I need to fix some of these things in my life to realize that it's okay to put myself out there to be hurt again. Yes, I might get hurt again. Matter of fact, I have been hurt after I put myself out there,
Yeah.
but it's so. Is it worth it? Absolutely, because I get to experience love. I get to experience that joy that love and connection with my kids brings, with my wife brings. You're going to be hurt when you put yourself out there, but it's better to be hurt and experience that love than to shut yourself off, put on that mask, and walk through with no feeling at all. So, yeah, I would just say if there's someone out there that's dealing with that hurt, that pain, that trauma from the past, that anxiety, that fear, trust me, I know where you're coming from. I do. I've been
Yeah.
there. But if I can make it, you can make it. There's hope on the other side. There is hope. There's always hope on the other side.
Jason, thank you so much. I know how much you pour into the life of others all the time, and I know it could be exhausting. And you and I have talked in the past, and I know there's so many stories of students who come up to you and just share all these things and whose lives you have saved, lives you have changed. And I'm sure that can probably weigh on you sometimes, just the emotionalness of it, and it probably drains you a lot. But man, you are so gifted, and you truly have a life calling to change lives, and that's like literally your job. And I think that's the coolest thing in the whole wide world. So thank you for just your dedication. Thank you for changing the lives of others. Thank you for changing the world. I know I'm not trying to be cheesy. Like I literally know that you changed the world, and you are speaking into the lives and the hearts and the minds of the next generation, man. So you're just amazing, and I love you so much, man. Thank you for all that you do.
Well, I appreciate you, Nick. And it's very kind of you. I love doing it. If you guys want to check out the mental health podcast, it's just called the Elevate Industries Podcast. You can go to elevateindustries.com and see it on the homepage. It's on Apple, Google, all that stuff, and it's free. But yeah, stay in contact, man. I love doing what I do. It's very rewarding. You do hear a lot of sad stories at times, and but I have to realize it's not by my strength that I do this. So
Yeah.
I had a great time, and I greatly appreciate you having me on.
Thanks, brother.